On April 24, 2013, at 5 a.m. in the pre-dawn darkness, a shocking emergency call was made to the 119 emergency line in Gohan County, Jeollanam Province. Someone just fell off the bridge. My younger sister was taking photos when she fell. Please come to the scene quickly. The caller was Mrs. Kim, a 40-year-old woman. Her report stated that someone in their group had fallen from the bridge while taking photos. At that time, the 119 emergency operator continuously asked, "Ma'am, where exactly did the accident occur? Where did this happen?" But Mrs. Kim was in such a state of panic that she couldn't answer clearly. Fortunately, another woman standing nearby intervened to explain the location. The accident site was the Naro Bridge, the bridge leading to Naro Island in Gohan County, Jeollanam Province. The 119th rescue team quickly departed, but on their way to the scene, they were consumed with anxious thoughts. If it was that bridge, the height from the bridge deck to the bottom was about 65 feet, equivalent to a 6-story apartment building. Falling from this height would certainly cause fatal injuries. Not only would limbs be broken, but if someone fell head first, death could be instantaneous. Additionally, internal organ damage and spinal fractures were very common. Even if someone miraculously survived, could they endure the cold for an extended period? Moreover, the waters near Naro Bridge had quite strong currents. Although the rescue team would quickly arrive at the scene, in that brief time, the victim could have already drifted away or sunk to the bottom. The rescue team felt restless and anxious and soon arrived at the scene. Just as they had initially feared, there was no sign of the person needing rescue. Only a lone sneaker remained on one side of the bridge. She might have drifted away or sunk to the ocean floor. Immediately after, everything from patrol boats to divers was mobilized to conduct a wide area search. Due to the strong current, the search area was significantly expanded. The search continued throughout the entire day, but unfortunately yielded no results. Meanwhile, the reporter, Mrs. Kim, 41, and her companion, Mrs. Seo, 43, were anxiously monitoring the search. Their panicked expressions were very clear. Police asked them many detailed questions to understand how the accident had occurred. Who was the victim? What was their relationship with them? And why were all three present at the bridge so early in the morning? First, the person who fell was Miss Choi Hyojin, 31 years old. Compared to the group of friends in their 40s, she was about 10 years younger, like a close sisterly relationship. All three lived in Gwangyang, Jeollanam Province and regularly met for dinner or drinks. On the evening of the 23rd around 7:30 p.m., Ms. Kim had called Hyojin, "Let's go eat," and suggested having dinner together. Since Hyojin had no plans, she happily agreed. When they arrived at the pre-arranged restaurant, Ms. Seo, another close friend, was already there. That day, the three ate together and drank rice wine. The drinking atmosphere became lively, and time had passed to 1000 p.m. At this point, Mrs. Kim suggested going home like this would be boring. "There's a nice place near Gohang Naro. Let's go there to drink more and have fun." Although sudden, everyone enthusiastically agreed. Thus, all three arrived at a motel on Naro Island after midnight. They bought alcohol from a nearby convenience store and brought it back to their room. The entire group continued drinking and chatting vibrantly until 4:30 a.m., initially planning to return home in the morning. All three were heavily intoxicated, their faces flushed red from alcohol. At this point, someone suggested, "Let's go outside and breathe some fresh air." The three left the motel and walked to the nearby Naro Bridge. The cool sea breeze helped them sober up faster. When they reached the middle of the bridge span, Hyojin enthusiastically said, "Sister, let's take a commemorative selfie," and suggested taking photos. Still in an intoxicated state, she staggered toward the bridge railing. "I'm taking the photo now. Are you ready?" But at that exact moment, a sudden, strong wind struck. Hyojin lost her balance and fell straight down below the bridge. Witnessing this horrific scene, Mrs. Kim and Mrs. Seo were extremely shocked. Unable to contain their panicked screams, Mrs. Kim tried to regain her composure and immediately called 119 for emergency help. It was truly an accident that occurred too suddenly and unexpectedly. However, upon hearing this testimony, police felt there were unusual points. Around 5 a.m. when the accident occurred, it was still not completely light and the atmosphere remained dark. Even nearby objects were difficult to identify clearly. In fact, in the photos Hyojin had taken, only the dim light of street lamps could be seen. Moreover, this was not a famous location or a familiar tourist destination. It also wasn't a place with special scenery worth photographing for memories. Of course, the three might have wanted to create their own personal memorable moments. Next, police went to check the motel where all three claimed they had stayed overnight. In the room were empty alcohol bottles along with Hyojin's hair tie. It seemed they had indeed stayed there overnight. However, something created a strange feeling. The empty bottles and paper cups were arranged neatly, too orderly. This gave the impression that the scene had been deliberately staged, creating an inexplicable discomfort. Based on these suspicions, police decided to separate Mrs. Kim and Mrs. Seo to question them in detail about the actual situation at that time. If this was truly an accident, the testimonies of both women should have similar points. First, Mrs. Seo testified that Hyojin had staggered toward the railing and in a split second had fallen below the bridge. Conversely, Mrs. Kim appeared vague, saying she didn't remember the details very well. She explained that because everything happened so quickly combined with being drunk, her memory seemed hazy. But memories of that moment were extremely important. That was precisely when the accident occurred. Yet, police didn't see any minimal effort from Mrs. Kim to try to recall. Police intuition told them she was hiding something. However, this was still just an intuitive feeling. First, they needed to learn about Miss Choi Hyojin. She had divorced her husband a year earlier and was currently living alone. Her current job was as a cashier at a supermarket with quite limited income. To cover living expenses, she was forced to borrow money from banks and lending companies. Due to extremely high interest rates, her debt snowballed, ultimately reaching nearly 70 million won. When police conducted deeper investigation, they discovered that in such difficult financial circumstances, Hyojin had taken out for life insurance policies within the past year. This raised the question, how could someone who had no money for living expenses and had to borrow have sufficient ability to pay insurance premiums? Could this not be her own money? Police proceeded to check the insurance premium payment history, and their prediction was accurate. In reality, the insurance payment money didn't come from Hyojin's account at all, but from the account of a 34-year-old man named Shin, and this person was running a loan shark business in Suncheon City. When examining the records further, there was one notable detail. Exactly 3 months earlier, Hyojin's insurance beneficiary had been changed to Mr. Shin. In fact, the insurance company's security cameras had recorded Hyojin coming directly and signing the relevant documents. Therefore, procedurally, there were no problems whatsoever. However, the final results showed that when Hyojin went missing, the person who would benefit the most was Mr. Shin. Police cautiously summoned him and asked about this insurance relationship. Mr. Shin replied, "If my girlfriend doesn't have money, I can pay the insurance premiums. What's the problem? The insurance beneficiary became me because she has no family, that's all." This meant the two had a romantic relationship, and he naturally wanted to help. So he acted accordingly, but there were still suspicious elements. This person was a loan shark creditor and Hyojin had many debts. Anyway, the fact that the two were dating was real. There would certainly be suspicious points. Police conducted investigations in various directions and finally found the crucial clue. A few days before Hyojin went missing, a Coronado vehicle had appeared multiple times near Naro Bridge on security cameras. When police wondered, what is this Coronado that appears so frequently, and proceeded to check the license plate, the owner was surprisingly Mr. Shin. Of course, this wasn't direct evidence of murder, However, it could be considered that he had conducted site reconnaissance before execution, but one important detail shouldn't be forgotten. When the incident occurred, the people present at the same time were Mrs. Kim and Mrs. Koyo. Consider this. Loan shark creditor Shin could receive 430 million won in insurance money when Hyojin died. If he disguised everything as an accident to obtain that insurance money, having witnesses like these women would make everything much more favorable. However, there was still a part that hadn't been clearly resolved. Usually, these women had close relationships with Hyojin, so what reason would cause these women to become accomplices in the crime? Could there be some relationship we didn't know about? Police focused on digging deeper into the relationship between these three people. Finally, they clarified the crucial connecting point. It turned out both Mrs. Kim and Mrs. Seo had borrowed tens of millions of won from loan shark creditor Shin. When investigating deeper, these three people had many meetings before the incident occurred. Security cameras had recorded them dining together at restaurants, and restaurant owners also testified they remembered them. This meant these three people might have formed a faction. Shin, the person who would benefit most from Hyojin's death, had offered some condition to the women who owed him money to draw them into the incident. That condition was very likely debt reduction. With this hypothesis, police proceeded to track the phone locations of all three people to see how they moved on the day the incident occurred. They also questioned transportation and pedestrians present around the area when the accident happened. They hoped to find some crucial clue that could support the hypothesis police had constructed. However, after nearly a month of meticulous investigation, they discovered no suspicious points. Although police intuition suggested Shin was the perpetrator, there was no concrete evidence. Not to mention murder, there wasn't even evidence showing he was connected to the bridge accident. Moreover, the body hadn't been found yet. In this situation, Shin made an unexpected move. He went directly to the Coast Guard station and requested to see the investigation files about his girlfriend. The reason given was that it was necessary to file an insurance compensation claim. But if he was the perpetrator, his real intention might have been to confirm how much the police had discovered. Police refused, saying, "Currently, disclosing information seems difficult." Shin even hired a lawyer and filed a complaint. These were very bold and brazen actions, as if challenging and mocking the police investigation. Nearly 2 months passed. The case still had no significant progress, but on June 7th, an incredible miracle occurred. Around 3 p.m. in Yeosu, Jeolli-nam Province, a severely decomposed female body was discovered in the rocks at Baya Bridge, Huajiang District. After identifying the body, it was indeed Hyojin. Finally, police could see a small ray of hope because now they could confirm whether she had truly had an accident or not. The autopsy results showed the cause of death was suffocation from strangulation and intentional murder. Moreover, from discovering this body, it became undeniably clear this was a murder case. Why? Because the body was carefully wrapped in curtain fabric and tightly bound with blue wire mesh. Not only that, to prevent it from floating to the surface, 2 construction bricks had been tied tightly to the body with rope. This was definitely an intentional murder. However, there was one more point of doubt that needed clarification. Why was Hyojin, who was supposedly to have fallen from Naro Bridge in Gohang, discovered at distant Baeki Bridge in Yeosu? These 2 bridges were 28 miles apart. One might think the body had drifted with the current, but in reality, the current from Baeki Bridge in Yeosu actually flows toward Naro Bridge in Gohang. Therefore, the hypothesis of drifting with the current was completely unreasonable. At this point, police suddenly realized the truth. From the beginning, everything had been a lie. The actual location where the murder occurred was not Naro Bridge, but had been Bridge from the start. What did this mean? Throughout this time, police had only believed the report and focused their search in the Gohang Bridge area, so they couldn't find the body. Thus, each clue was gradually resolved. Having found the body, police urgently arrested all 3 people. The 2 women, Kim and Seo, along with the main perpetrator, Shin, on charges of murder and body disposal. Shin said, terrible, and complied with the arrest. But Kim and Seo strongly denied the murder conspiracy. We don't know anything about murder. Giving Hyojin sleeping pills was true, but after that, we just handed her over to Shin. You gave her sleeping pills. But were these two really telling the truth? Right then, police comfortably smiled and showed the two women a video. Seeing it, Kim and Seo became silent. It was security camera footage from the day of the incident, showing the two getting into Shin's Coronado and stopping at Bika Bridge. Thus, their complicity was completely exposed. Fortunately, Shin also confessed. So the charges against the two women were clarified. So what actually happened that day? At the end of 2012, Hyojin first met loan shark creditor Shin through Seo's introduction. At that time, she had recently divorced her husband and was living alone. Financial hardship made her struggle through each day, so both mentally and economically, she was in a state of exhaustion. Shin had targeted this weakness precisely. Every time he met Hyojin, he spent generously to win her affection. The two quickly became close and soon became lovers. Actually, all of this was part of the evil plan Shin had laid out. In fact, for some time before, he had been actively seeking a woman living alone with no family to rely on because he wanted to execute an insurance fraud scheme through this woman. During this time, Seo had informed him that among the people she knew, there was Hyojin, who had just gone through divorce and was in debt. Shin immediately said, "Sister, then introduce me to that divorced woman." After meeting, he began approaching Hyojin purposefully. After becoming lovers, he began revealing his true nature. Shin told Hyojin, "You're in a lot of debt, aren't you? There's a very easy way to pay off all that debt and proposed insurance fraud." The plan was to buy as many life insurance policies as possible under Hyojin's name, then report a fake disappearance. Hyojin had also agreed because living alone was too difficult, making her tempted by the promise of earning a lot of money. Thus, they enrolled in for life insurance contracts. However, when everything was proceeding according to plan, an unexpected obstacle appeared. Co discovered their criminal plan and demanded to participate. At this point, main perpetrator Shin thought that when reporting Hyojin's fake disappearance, having a third-party witness would make everything smoother. Therefore, he drew Seo into the scheme, establishing a three-person insurance fraud gang: Shin, Seo, and Hyojin. According to the agreement, when they got the insurance money, Hyojin herself would receive 50% while Shin and Seo would each get 25%. But gradually Shin began feeling dissatisfied. Although he was the one who planned it, the money coming to him was too little. Why should Hyojin get the largest share? He began thinking. I'd rather kill her outright and monopolize all that money myself. Once he had this intention, he secretly discussed it with Seo. Being in debt to Shin, Seo agreed to disguise killing Hyojin as an accident in exchange for having all her debt erased. And here they also drew in Kim, another acquaintance. Thus, Kim and Seo deliberately became close to Hyojin. At the same time, this was when the membership of the three-person fraud gang began to change. On April 23rd, the two women called Hyojin to the restaurant. While happily eating and drinking together, when Hyojin went to the bathroom, they secretly put sleeping pills in the rice wine she was drinking. Hyojin continued drinking without any suspicion. And soon after, her vision began to blur and she fell into unconsciousness. At 10:15 p.m., Shin, who had been waiting near the restaurant, arrived, and all three pretended to help Hyojin into the car as if she was just drunk. And right there, the three committed the brutal crime. At this point, Hyojin was in a completely immobile state. They placed a plastic bag over her face, intending to suffocate her. They had planned murder from the beginning, but because it was their first time, it wasn't like in movies. She didn't die immediately. They panicked and immediately changed methods using cable ties they had prepared to strangle her neck. Hyojin couldn't resist and soon stopped breathing. Afterward, they used curtain fabric they had prepared to wrap the body and tied it tightly with wire mesh. They moved the body into the car trunk and drove around Yosu, looking for a deserted place with no passers-by. Around 2:30 a.m. on the 24th, they parked at Bika Island Pier in Yosu. Since it wasn't yet time for fishermen to go out to sea, this area was very deserted and quiet. Moreover, there were no street lights, so the atmosphere was very dark. They hung to bricks on the body and threw it straight into the sea. But they didn't stop there. Now they had to create an alibi. Therefore, they drove toward Gohong, intending to pretend that 3 women had naturally traveled to Naro. Anticipating the police investigation would come, they deliberately chose accommodation without security cameras. They arranged empty bottles and cups in the room if they had drunk a lot of alcohol. Finally, they deliberately left Hyojin's hair tie as evidence. Not only that, Kim and Seo also naturally left one of Hyojin's sneakers on Naro Bridge, completely staging the bridge fall situati. And soon after, with the attitude of, wait, let's act a bit scared, they began their performance and proceeded to make the report. At this time, Seo stood beside giving detailed instructions so Kim wouldn't make any mistakes. Truly spine-chilling, thus, the entire incident was completely clarified. All 3 were prosecuted. Previously, Shin had confessed to police, but when appearing in court, he denied the charges. He presented the absurd argument that although he had strangled and thrown her into the sea, he didn't know this would lead to death. Because of such brazen attitude, even the courtroom audience couldn't contain their sighs and angry outcries. The results were announced. The trial court sentenced Shin to 30 years in prison, while Seo and Kim each received 20 years. However, the prosecution objected that this was such a thoroughly planned crime. Yet, the punishment was too light and immediately appealed. Going through appeals and retrials, finally in September 2014, the Supreme Court declared that the truth about complicity in this case had been fully proven. The court sentenced Shin to life imprisonment. However, Seo and Kim were considered for mitigation due to difficult economic circumstances, being tormented by debt, and being enticed and drawn in by Shin. That is, the court considered there was coercion and compulsion from Shin's side in this case. Moreover, these 2 were evaluated as showing some remorse. So they were reduced to 15 years in prison compared to the original trial sentence. And those are today's 2 cases. Thank you for following along and see you in the next.